here. So, first of all, welcome to all of you, really, from the bottom of my heart. You know, it's not every day that you've done 90, so, you know, let's give a collective shout out to Grolier. And E.E. Cummings, Donald Hall, all the incredible array of poets that have gone through this place, a tiny little place, but a kind of a shrine. In one spot, 90 years, hoping to get to 100 and beyond. And at that point, I can retire to a remote village in Africa, drink some palm wine. When I'm 200 years old, you can all come join me. First though, you know, the irrepressible spirit of E.E. Cummings, this rascal son of Cambridge, you know? He was a true original and such an unquenchable prescriber of words, the playfulness. And then, of course, there is our friend Donald Hall in New Hampshire, where they say, live free or die. And he has said, I will live free and I will not die. And the Exeter River, white apples, Villanelle, you name it. Well, I think we're in for a treat tonight. And in a minute, I'll call on Howie Rosine to get us rolling with the music. But first, one quick reflection, you know. Some years ago, I read an article about this ancient burial pit in China, really ancient. And they were already perforating the shank bone of a cow to make music, okay? To make ceremony. And a thought crossed my mind. The material conditions of life must have been nothing at this point. So why this need to make music? Why didn't they bury their dead in the gully? You know? And it seems as if music is really hardwired in our brains. And this is perhaps where poetry comes in. You know, the rhythmicity of daily speech, of the ordinary languages of the human tribes of the world, the rise and fall of the vocables, the heartbeat. If music is there, can poetry be far behind? If poetry is there, can music be far behind? So I think we're in for a treat tonight, okay? And there's a lot of reflections. We don't, I believe, have to go up to the mountains to find the particular language of poetry. It's really in the human languages, ordinary language of the human tribes of the world. Is already infested, enabled by music, though we don't always notice it. And so, I don't want to take up too much of your time because we have a wonderful evening. So, then huge thanks to Howard Frazin and the musicians. We'll be introducing them and then they'll take us where we want to go. And huge thanks to Francine Lachance, who, for all the incredible work that she has done pulling all of this stuff together. She's worked early and late, weekdays and weekends, and here we are finally. And also, I'd like to say many thanks to my wife, Carol, who is here, to Elizabeth Duran, and the staff of the Grolier, who kept the place running, rain or shine. And if it weren't for them, I think the 6 Plimpton Street would be overgrown with weeds while I was home, you know, scrounging around to pay the bills and things like that. So really great thanks to them, and above all to all of you, because the Grolier is really supported by, if it weren't for you people, the place would be nothing. 90 years is a long time. But because it has sunk deep roots in the community, people come and go. T.S. Eliot, you name them. I got a call once from some guy in Sweden who left this place asking if he could speak to God in Kaine, you know, garden. And get people from Australia, man from Seoul, Korea made the bowl that he sent us, young kid from Ghana. I'm really awed and very grateful for this incredible, for all your friendship and support. And thanks again for coming out tonight. We live to be 100, maybe 200, and then who knows. But thank you all for coming.
I'm Howard Frazen. He just talked very deeply about music, so what do I have to say, right? Hopefully I'll just, as a composer, you'll hear what me and friends have to say about the connection between poetry and music through what we've done. I will say, just sort of briefly, from what I hear from Efenye, is music is about connection and it's about something deeply personal. And so I just want to say, I've known, I didn't meet Efenye until much later. I've known Carol for years because I taught their daughter, Ndidi, when she was little. So our connection is musical. I finally met Efenye. He came to a WordSong, which we'll talk about in a second. He came actually to the WordSong that you're about to hear, this E.E. Cummings. And he came to a house of some friends of mine, Keith and Tom Cush, who are also here tonight. While we were putting together that concert, Kate and Tom and I had a conversation, and we discovered we were English majors at the University of Michigan, different generations, but we knew a lot of the same professors. One of the professors that they talked about with deep admiration and inspiration was Donald Hall. And so we had always had in our back pocket, oh, we need to do a WordSong Donald Hall. And I'll get to what happened to that later. But so that's always been connected to this as well. So I'm very excited to be making these connections complete, a full circle tonight. But so this all started with WordSong, which is an organization that I started with my co-founder, Tom Schnauber. He's going to tell you a little bit about it, and then we're going to present something that's related to that. And it has to do with multiplicity and multiple perspectives.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Tom Schnauber, a co-founder of WordSong, along with Howard Frazen. WordSong came out of this notion that Howie and I had when we first met and first started talking, that contemporary composers, or I should say composers of contemporary classical music, had kind of lost our connection to the audience. And a lot of it was our own fault, or at least the fault of our musical progenitors. And one of them was that we lost the conversation with the audience about the music. Historically, the listeners and musicians spent a lot more time talking to each other and interacting than they do now. So we founded WordSong based on the premise that we wanted to reignite the conversation between listeners and composers and performers. And one way we thought we would do this is people often feel uncomfortable talking about music, but everyone feels comfortable talking about words. So the tack that we took was we would pick one poem and then have usually 4 different composers set that poem to music in their own way, to basically give their own sort of sonic take on the piece. And then those 4 settings of the same text would be the basis for a conversation-based program. Now, we're not going to be doing the conversation tonight because we have all sorts of other wonderful things happening, but what you're going to hear soon, the first set of pieces you're going to hear, are the 4 different settings of E.E. Cummings' poem, In Just, that that were written by 4 different composers, and I'm going to take this moment now to point out that there's a change in order. Apparently, the performers noticed me. If you look under WordSong, it says In Just, text by E.E. Cummings. You will see the 4 different composers who said it. The first song you're going to hear is actually by Howard Frazen, the first setting of E.E. Cummings. Then you're going to hear the setting by Benjamin Pinzetsky, who you're going to see in a minute. And then you're going to hear the setting by Adam Simon, who's also in the audience, and then the last setting is my own. As Howie mentioned, it's about multiplicity, it's about sound, it's about words and meaning and music and meaning. So one thing we do like to do is to sort of illustrate the difference in sound that can result in different music. We often like to read the poem out loud, have a couple different people read the poem out loud, because even just someone in their reading can bring a very different meaning to the same poem. So I'm going to bring up one of the other composers, Benjamin Pinzetsky. He's going to read In Just in his way, and then I'm going to read it in mine, and then you're going to hear the musical settings after that.
In just spring, when the world is mud luscious, the little lame balloon man whistles far and wee. And Eddie and Bill come running from marbles and piracies, and it's spring, when the world is puddle wonderful, the queer old balloon man whistles far and wee. And Betty and Isabel come dancing from hopscotch and jump rope, and it's spring, and the goat-footed balloon man whistles far and wee.
In just spring, when the world is mud luscious, the little lame balloon man whistles far and wee. And Eddie and Bill come running from marbles and piracies, and it's spring, when the world is puddle wonderful, the queer old balloon man whistles far and wee. And Betty and Isabel come dancing from hopscotch and jump rope, and it's spring, and the goat-footed balloon man whistles far and wee.
So thank you for coming back for the second half. I won't say that much because there's a lot of music and there's a lot of words in music. I'll sort of. What's different about this than what you heard just in the first half? This is a song cycle. So there are 6 poems that are fashioned to tell a story. I actually went, so I've been visiting Don. And like I said, my connection to Donald Hall is through, partially through Kate and Tom Cush, who introduced me to his poetry. And in the conversation, I didn't study with Don, but they did. I studied with another teacher at the University of Michigan. I was an English major. His name was Bert Hornback, and Bert and Don were best friends. And so about 3 or 4 years ago, when this project started to take shape, I met Don and Bert, who I hadn't seen in 30 some odd years. And I came to music quite late. I started with words. I thought I was going to be a writer. I was an English major in college, came to conservatory, basically musically illiterate. But it was because Bert sort of said, oh, you should write a piece for me, based on Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, that I did, not knowing how to read music, but that's how it all started. At any rate, so then I did another sort of audacious thing, basically, is I showed up, first time I ever meet Don, and I say, oh, I picked these 6 poems, and I think they tell a story, and I'm going to tell you why. And so just, so don't, first of all, don't clap in between if you can, because it really is supposed to be like a little bit of a play. And as most of you know about Don, one of the heartbreaking parts of his life was the loss of his wife, Jane Kenyon. And there were a lot of poems about that. I picked, just sort of serendipitously, The Wish, which it turns out he told me, was one of the last poems he ever wrote about her death, and sort of felt like with that poem he started to move forward. But in my rendition, I used that as the beginning of being stuck and not being able to move forward. And then we go back in time. And interestingly, too, I didn't realize this until literally 2 or 3 days ago when I happened to be watching some interview of Don on the computer. He'd been through analysis and did that whole thing. Well, that's sort of what I did a little bit. I start with the child, which is going back to a complicated beginning in some way. And then there's a marriage that doesn't work that you get a sense of in Moonshot, and a sort of an anger. And then there's Villanelle, which is just like literally, fuck it, right? I can say that because the poem does. And then it comes around again with by the Exeter River, where he is in communion with his father, and his father sort of maybe had those difficulties too, which you'll see in that poem. And then it comes around one last time with him contemplating the death of his own father. This was tough. That was actually the first text that I was going to set. I wrote that song. I started writing it 9 days ago, and I finished it about 4 days ago. And I'm not a fast writer, but it was scary because I felt to write that, I needed to think about the possibility of my own father's death, and my father hasn't died. But I have a complicated relationship with him, so. Anyways, So enjoy. I was going to have an interview. I was going to interview Don, and we were going to project it before, but I didn't finish until Saturday. So we've sort of communicated. He's really excited. He would be thrilled that you're all here. And I will certainly, if anyone wants to say anything to me afterwards, let me know. I'm going to be visiting him in a couple of weeks with the recording, and I'll be happy to pass on any well wishes from anybody. So, and lastly, thank you to the Grolier and to Efenye. This couldn't have happened without their support, and this couldn't have happened without the support of the musicians that are playing tonight. Just the last thing I'll say about that, you know, they're not just musicians. These folks are my friends and my colleagues. They're my life. There's a back and forth. I don't just simply write something and they do it. There's a continual process, and this is the culmination of that process. And I'm moved by what they've done. So thank you and enjoy.
I keep a weary ghost inside me. Oh, let me go. I hear her crying. Deep in your dark, you want to hide me, and so perpetuate my dying. I can't undo the grief that you weep by the stone where I am lying. Oh, let me go. My work and women half distracted, I endure the day and sleep at night to watch her dying reenacted when the cold dawn descends like twilight. How can I let this dream forget? The white withdraw from my sight and let her go. Her body, as I watch, grows smaller. Her face recedes, her kiss is colder. Watching her disappear, I call her. Come back, With a drink in my hand and my mouth turned down, I sat with Min and Bill, looking at a television picture in July of 1969. As my life emptied like a bottle on its side, glug, glug, glug. In 2 months I would turn 41. hopeless, divorced, abandoned, without love for my children. I understood that my losses were my own contrivance. I sat drinking gin while snowy Neil Armstrong fixed his indefinite, heavy, enormous boots to a ladder's rise and wobbled down toward the moon, scattered rubble and boring surface. Who cares? If he spoke from a sound stage in Arizona, who the fuck cares? Katie could put her feet behind her head, or do a grand plie position too. Her suppleness magnificent in bed. I strain my lower back, and Katie bled only a little, doing what we could do. drink up your soup, and I'll put you to bed. By the Exeter River, by the river I said, stop dreaming of rivers, old father, my dad. Or save all your dreaming till you're tucked in bed. It was cold by the river, we came in a sled. Stop dreaming of colder than father, my dad. Then blankets and bolsters and pillows of the bed. We took off his dress and the cap from his head. Outside in the winter, old father, my dad, what could you be thinking? Let's go off to bed. And Sally, poor Sally, I reckon is dead. Was she your old sweetheart, old father, my dad? Now lean on my shoulder and come up to bed. We drowned the baby. I remember we sat up in bed and held my breath and stared at the pale closed door. White apples and the taste of stone. White apples and the taste of stone. White apples of White apples and the taste White apples and the taste of stone. If he called again, I would put on my coat and galoshes.
What can I say? What can I say? Wonderful. I mean, Keith and Linda and Krista, Raphael, Robert, Howie, Tom, Benjamin, Adam. These are the names. And thank you all. Thank you all. This was a very special evening. I keep thinking too, all the different translation projects that we're all involved in. The young man, the young woman out on their first date, trying to read each other's moods, each other's intentions. There's a translation going on there. We normally think of this as languages, you know, French to German to English. But we sometimes forget the deeper meanings of these things. Look at the renderings of E. Cummings' poem, the light and the sprightly, the brooding, one single text, and look at Donald Hall's poems and what you've just heard. These translations, what brings us together. Think about the Grimm's Law, the fairy Grimms, from Isis, Bata to Fada in English, the transitions, the fish to fish. Nobody superintended it, the natural languages of the world, making these transitions. Mahatma Gandhi, great soul Gandhi. And from Ma you get majoritarian, magisterial, Atma, atmosphere, breath, all these linkages, the world that we know. So the translations, and I know from my own personal life what got me involved in poetry many years ago before I went on to do my grad work in philosophy. When I was at Pomona College, to hear the bound, a broken man, a difficult man, the peace and cantos, that Tudor indeed is gone, and every rose blood red, blanch white, that in the sunset glows cries blood, 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 against the Gothic son of England, as the Howard of Boleyn knows. A young man from Africa hearing this, and all it reminded me of was of the OBERON, the king coming out at the Ofala festival to the insistent beat of the royal drums. It's gone, and every road, that was my translation. And it gave me a big respect for the language of these English colonial masters, Pit helmet, they gave us trouble. We didn't care much. So in the hands of an American poet, very difficult man, broken man. Tudor indeed. All I heard was the insistent beat of the royal drums of the OBERON coming out into the Ofala festival. That was my translation of these linguistic performances. So that's all I really wanted to say, because we have more in common than we do that hold us apart. And so I'll read you my poem called Before a Common Soil. Let this then be your understanding, you sons and daughters of the ancient stars, that your home reaches beyond the earth, which is your home. May you go forth across the land, and with the movement of flutes celebrate the blessings which the gods have given you. May you catch the shifting of the light at the tip of the flute's tongue, and may you ask of the darkness that it remain with you, lest the light lose sight of whence it came. Oh yes, I have heard song, the power of which was not of the world, though the singer of it was in the world. And I have called out to you, children of an undivided earth, that you join your hands together and be of one accord before a common soil, lest the rivers cease to water the land, lest the voices of the singers be forever still. Oh yes, I have heard song, the power of which was not of the world, though the singer of it was in the world. Go in peace. Let us take care of each other, okay?